have a line of people sitting, but this time they're not going to be presenting for 5 minutes each. This is going to be a roundtable conversation shaping the future of education, AI exploration and practice between Peking University and University of Cambridge. And on behalf of you all, I'd like to welcome our colleagues, guests, visitors, friends from Peking University, Assistant Professor Xinquang Liang, Professor Zhuo Huang, and Professor Jianwei Zhang, and representing the University of Cambridge, Imogen Caseborn, Dr. Steve Watson, and DEFI advisor, Dr. Wayne Holmes. And they will be in the admirable hands